Okay, Eric, have you got a Star Trek trivia question for us?
I do. This is a DS9 question. Um, I don't know, easy or hard, guys?
Oh,
Hard.
hard.
Go hard.
Hard? Okay,
Mhm.
hard.
You know how good I am with the easy ones.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, let me adjust my.
DS9's my era, so although now I'm gonna miss it, but fine.
Hold on. Choose the answer. Hold on. Yeah. How do I adjust the.
What was the name of the captain?
There we go.
DS9.
Neelix.
Okay, here we go, guys. Ready?
Hmm.
How did Odo regain his shape-shifting abilities in The Begotten? A. Dr. Mora Pell's experiments. B. The founders returned them. C. Bashir cured them. Or D. He absorbed a dying changeling.
Oh,
I don't think any.
what am I doing with my life? Look at that giant worm.
It is a little odd.
All right, welcome back to a piece of the action. I'm Micah.
I'm Eric.
I'm Greg. We already forgot the order here.
That's
Yeah,
right.
as usual, you guys are
We're on it.
awesome on the cues. So
Well, it's been a little while, guys. It's good to see
yeah.
everyone again.
Hello.
Welcome back.
Today we're going to be reviewing Dune. So this I'm looking at the 2019 version, although you guys are telling me that it's actually a remake of the 1970s version.
Yeah, it's
Essentially the
basically
same
the same
game.
thing. Basically the same game.
Okay. We'll start with the introduction. We'll go to you, Greg. Maybe you could give us sort of the premise and the basic overview of the rules.
That's a laughable goal here with Dune. Uh, I'll try to be as brief as possible. But I mean, so it's Dune. It's basically the book in game form, as close as you're going to get, I think. The At the end of the day, though, I think it's a area control game. Like if you really boil it down to its essence, the map is the planet Dune, and you're playing one of the six factions on that planet, and you're trying. There's on that five of those zones on the planet are strongholds. And your goal is at the end of a whole turn, after everyone's taken their turn, at the end of all that, if you have a presence in three of those strongholds, you win the game. You can also ally with people, and if you do ally with somebody, then the two of you together need four strongholds. That's basically it. Otherwise, the game goes to this. It varies, but I think in this game it's 10 rounds, and if no one controls it by the end of that, there's like different tie-breaking things that will happen that will give a victory to somebody. But basically, you try and control those three strongholds. Now, around that is a bunch of other stuff, and I can't get into all of it, but essentially, you're beaming troops down, you're drop shipping them down to the planet to different locations, and you're moving them around the planet trying to get into these locations that you need. If at the combat phase comes around, if two factions or more occupy the same location, combat happens. And combat's pretty big in this game. And again, I can't go to all the details because combat's pretty complex here. But at its base, if you've played Scythe, think like Scythe plus 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 plus, because there's dials that you have, and you're going to dial up a number that you're going to secretly reveal to each other. And the number that you're dialing is how many troops you're going to commit to the battle. The winner of the battle loses that amount of troops. The loser of the battle loses everything. But in addition to that, you can do a whole thing where you're putting stuff under this dial. For example, you can put leader. You have to put a leader card under there. So you have leaders that are on your side. Those will just add to your combat power. However, you're also playing other cards, these treachery cards that, for example, can attack the other person's leader. And you can play defenses to try to like defend against those types of attacks because the person can take out your leader and you lose that bonus. And there's a bunch of other cards that you can play. There's spice that you can put in there to like buff up your troops. There's a whole bunch of stuff that happens in combat, but basically that's the core. You're trying to outbid the other player without bidding so much that you're now in a weak position. Beyond that, over the course of a turn, Dune things start to happen. Think of the big highlights from the book. it happens. So there's a storm, there's a sandstorm that goes around the board. If you're exposed, you're not in a stronghold. When a storm goes over you, you lose everything. There's sandworms that are going to pop up and eat things in that spot. There's spice that you have to go out and collect because that helps you bid on those treachery cards I talked about earlier. People have traders on your side that you don't know who they are. They could reveal them in combat, and it doesn't matter what you bid, you lose everything. That's kind of the core of the game. But the big part of Dune, I think, that makes it even more interesting rules wise is each of those six factions. Everything I just said, a faction breaks one of those rules. So each faction does their own things, and we could be here forever talking about the rules for each faction. But just to give you a general idea, the Fremen, if you know anything about the books, they do what you kind of think they would do. They're the natives of the planet, so they actually are really good with dealing with the factors on the planet. So most people lose everyone in a sandstorm. They only lose half their troops. They know how far the storm is going. For most people, they don't know, but they can predict where the storm's going to go. The worms come up, they can hop on them and ride around the board on them. So all those kind of things. They have extra rules that apply for all that. They don't need as much spice as other people do because they can fight at full spice level where other people need to collect that for the battle. That's just one example. Each of these factions, though, has their own set of rules that kind of applies to them. So that's like 20% of the rules overview. There's a lot more going on, but I'm sure we'll address some of it as we go through the review.
Okay, good. So so I think you're right. It does sound to me, very much like what I would expect a Dune board game to have in it. I'm kind of curious. Then going to you, Eric. We'll talk about the theme, and I'm sure as we touched on in Dune when we did our Dune Imperium review. Just as a reminder, you are a very big Dune fan, so I'm curious to see what you thought about how the theme was executed for this version of Dune.
Yeah, it's been forever since we reviewed Dune Imperium. I don't remember what I said about the theme in that. I think I gave it a kind of a middling. Does this game work with the theme? No. The theme in this is it's the first book of the series, effectively, but it does not follow it does not follow an events kind of path. There are no event cards. Well, I mean, there are no like. Then this thing from the book happens at a particular time that you're not following the course of the book. It's just like all the components of the first book are there, and then things happen at different times and randomly, which is one of my favorite things about board games in general. Is when you have like a historic war game or something, and you can explore, experiment with different strategies that breaks what actually happened in history. I really like that in board games, and Dune does that as well, where the whole course of the way that the books went can be upended. The Harkonnens can win. Everything can go sideways for any particular faction, but all the components are there, and I don't think any. I hesitate to say this because I don't like to do superlatives necessarily, but this is one of the most thematic games that you could like. This is Dune. You feel like you are playing that faction. It really excels at that. And one thing I wanted to say in the introduction part to kind of supplement what Greg said is the bones of this game. Actually, the history of it goes back to Cosmic Encounter. So this was originally Cosmic Encounter, very old game. When did that come out, Greg?
I don't know. I don't have the year off the top of my head.
60s. I don't know. It's a very old game, and this was basically like somebody thought, hey, we could actually use the bones of Cosmic Encounter, which if anybody's played it, we haven't reviewed it, but if anybody's played it, it's a fairly straightforward. It's a simple game, except when you start adding in all of the alien powers in Cosmic Encounter. That's what makes the game fun, is that all of the different aliens that you can play have different wildly game-breaking rules. And somebody was like, hey, what if we just had the 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 factions from Dune? Those are the only aliens basically in Cosmic Encounter, the only game-breaking powers. and we'll just kind of like tweak here and there. So it starts with a real fun skeleton of Cosmic Encounter, and then it adds on the the meat of Dune, and it does that very, very well. Probably one of the one of the best thematic interpretations in board games, in my opinion.
Thinking about the theme in a game like this, where we could have like historical games that are built on top of a theme that revolves around a time period, but here we're talking about something that's built around an actual narrative, a story. There's a story, Dune. There's events that go from beginning to end. Do you feel like in a case like that, is that easier to stick to a theme to when it comes to a board game? Is it harder because there's a narrative, you think, or make no difference? It's all just execution.
Well, in this case, it works seamlessly, and I think you know, if I was just to be told, oh, this is like, this had the skeleton of Cosmic Encounter, and then somebody decided to put Dune on it, it sounds kind of like it might be cobbled together. And maybe to a certain extent, Greg mentioned the complexity of the rules. There are a lot of rules, and those rules, the point of those rules is to give each of the factions its particular thematic flavor. But in this case, you're not losing anything from not having like a set series of events programmed into the game. I think it's gaining something because it lets you explore with different options that could have happened in the book, and kind of like I mean, there is it, there is a fictional path that the first book takes, right? I mean, Paul, and the Atreides, they come to Arrakis. Um, Things play out a certain way. So in that sense, it's kind of similar to a historical game in that the War of 1812 played out a certain way, but the where this game shines and where what I like about a lot of historical war games and things like that is when the option is presented, when you're not forced into a particular path, when things can go a different way. And this isn't a great comparison, but it almost kind of feels like an RPG where you're playing a there's a ton of different fantasy novels out there that games are built on. But when you play the game, you have options to take that character, or in this case, a faction, and do something completely else with them that adds to the game. I don't know if that answers your question, but it certainly doesn't lose anything from not having that structure to it.
Okay. Okay, good.
Yeah,
So
I
let's
think
go ahead then and open up to both of you. Maybe we'll talk just, I guess, in more general terms then about what the game feels like to play. Maybe Greg, you want to start us off with that?
yeah. Well, I kind of want to talk about the theme a little bit.
Okay.
My own 2 cents on there. Uh, with the theme, the reason I know this theme worked in this game is because the first time I played this game was actually not Dune. It was called Rex. So for a while, Fantasy Flight had the rights to this game, but they lost the IP license to Dune, so they couldn't make the Dune theme game. So they took the same game and they put it into their own Twilight Imperium universe, and they rethemed everything around those characters. That was the first time I ever played this game, or something like it. Within a round, I knew exactly which every faction was supposed to be. I was like, okay, these are clearly Atreides. These are clearly the Bene Gesserit. This is obviously Spice. This is a Sandstorm. And by the end of the game, despite all of the Twilight Imperium trappings, I was calling them by their Dune names, and no one told me who they were. It's so clear to me how what it was. And I think that's where the theme comes from in this game. It doesn't care about the events of the book. It's not trying to simulate the events of the book. The theme of this game comes from it gives each of the factions the personality they had in the books. Like I said, the Fremen, they're the natives of that planet. They know the planet, and it feels like that. That's all the rules are given them to make them feel like they're the natives of the planet. The Emperor's super rich, has good fighters. The Bene Gesserit are playing their own game, almost literally. They have their own setting set up. So like all of that is what makes it feel thematic. It's not like it's trying to hit any events in the book per se. It's just giving these six factions the same personalities and giving the rules to support those personalities that allows them to kind of feel the way that they do. So I think that's it. Uh, but if we're talking about feel of play, chaos. If I were to really sum it up, I mean, I've already talked about it, but it's like, when you lose a battle, you lose everything. Someone can play a treachery card and everything is wiped out on your side. If they have one of your leaders as a treachery card, sandstorms wipe out everything. It's just everything is just constantly evolving in this game. It never feels like it's sitting still. It never feels like you're in a safe position. You cannot turtle in this game. And I think that just gives it a very active feel. It's just constantly moving, and you're constantly having to rethink your plans. So that's kind of how I'd sum up this feel of play.
The Bene Gesserit can kind of turtle.
But that's true. Danny Jesuit are their own. Again, they're playing their own game, so
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
different
exactly.
than everyone else.
That's interesting. That brings a question to my mind, but I am almost sure that you're going to cover it in good and bad. So
Yes,
I will leave it.
I'll retouch on this.
Yeah, yeah, I would imagine. Okay. Okay. Eric, you have anything you want to add to feel of play?
Yeah, feel of play, it has not been broached much, but the negotiation, it's true that what Greg said, it's an area control game, but the real feel of play comes from the negotiation aspect and the alliances and the breaking alliances and the I would say less chaos, although there is a lot of randomness in this game, more tension. It's a very, very tense game because you have to decide, like when a worm pops up, that's when people can make alliances, which probably I would have to say, since we're still in feel, that is the weirdest aspect of the game. I don't know why thematically when a worm pops up, all of a sudden everybody can make or break alliances. But put that aside, there had to be
Giant
some kind of
worms
trigger.
popping up in the sand make you rethink your values.
Yeah,
Though, right?
exactly.
What am I doing with my life? Look at that giant worm.
It is a little odd, but there had to be some kind of trigger for it, so that works. But yeah, tension because you have we're going to get into this a lot more, but you have information that nobody else has. Every faction has some kind of knowledge that nobody else has. The Fremen know how. Is it the Fremen? I'm gonna look like an idiot here, but the Fremen know how far the storm's going to move, I
Yeah,
believe.
that's the Fremen. Yeah.
The Harkonnens know what all the no, I'm sorry, the Atreides know what all the treachery cards are. The Harkonnens have twice as many. No, I'm sorry, they have four times as many traders as everybody else. There's always some information out there that everybody has that you can try and bargain and deal with, and that adds to the level of interaction with the players, but also a real high level of tension, especially when you go into combat because you don't know. Hopefully, you have a good idea, but you can pay the Harkonnens for this information sometimes, but you don't know if your opponent has your leader as a traitor. So and if that happens, everything is lost. So lots of tension in this game.
So let's go ahead then to our next section. We'll talk about priorities and strategies, things that you guys found to be effective or things you think that perhaps a new player coming to the game for the first time might like to know and keep in mind to have a better chance of winning. Go maybe Eric, to you first.
You know, I don't have a lot to say about this because surprisingly, because the game does an excellent job of giving a kind of a strategy tips per faction on the back of your little um, I guess GM screens is what they basically are. Like everybody has one of
Shields.
these shields. Yeah. This is used to keep secret how much spice you have, things like that. But on the back of these is a strategy tip for every house. And if I was to go into the the strategies, that would be quite lengthy, or strategies and priorities would be quite lengthy and covered already. They do a great job of discussing that. I would say on a meta level, you need to engage. That's probably the biggest priority and I'll get into this a little bit later, but it can make or break the game. If everybody is playing their cards so close to their chest, they're not willing to share that information or sell, I should say, sell that information to anyone else. The game does change drastically for the worse. So I would say that the best thing you can do when you're playing this game is to follow the strategy tips on the player shields and be willing to make deals with people. Um, because there's so much randomness in the game, you need as much of that information as possible. And so, um, yeah, being too introverted in this game as a player is a bad way to start. You need to be willing and to engage with all the other players.
Sounds good. Greg, what about you?
I have the exact same strategy stuff written down here as Eric does, which explains why I'm so bad at this game. Um,
Oh, thanks. Appreciate that.
yeah, no, yeah, exactly what he said. It's really difficult to give out a strategy guide here because I feel like the strategy is different for each faction. You kind of have to embrace each faction for what it is. And yeah, I mean, what's on the back of that shield is a good start. It should be noted this game is played pretty seriously. I don't know if there's like actual, I'm sure there's like championships for this game, but some people take this game pretty, they play a lot of this and they're probably gonna have better information, whereas I'm just a novice at this. But yeah, again, the same with Eric. If there's general strategy tips, I do think that information flow is important. Getting involved. It's kind of like Catan and right, like just trade. You have to trade. If you don't trade, you're not going to win the game, period. So you have to be involved in that bartering process. The only other thing I might add, and this might just prove how noob I am at this game. For some reason, whenever I've won this game or have come the closest to winning this game, it's always involving the shield wall.
Mm.
I don't. So there's this thing in this game where like, so two of the five strongholds are protected from the storm, but there's a way to blow up a shield wall. I think two of them become unprotected once you do that, and now you still have to control them. But if the storm goes over, it wipes you out. And I was, I, I've definitely won once with that strategy. In the last game we played, I came really close to winning with that. Just figuring out how to use the shield wall to your advantage so that you can wipe out the people in there, which gives you an open city to just kind of march into, kind of. But I don't know, just kind of focus on that. For me, that has always worked. But
That's a good point. Just real specific. That, and probably you love this about this game, Greg, is that one faction can win on turn one. I think it's turn one. The Harkonnens already have two strongholds that they have. They just need one more. So making sure that that they don't get the third one right away, is an important beginning, something that beginners should know.
So I kind of wonder because like I remember this was the case with was it Twilight Imperium does that too, right? Where you have the all the races have their different abilities.
they
I
do,
think.
but I don't think it's as extensive as these.
Sure.
Yeah.
I just remember with that game, and I wonder if it's the case with this one. Eric, like you mentioned, obviously every faction is going to have their advantages that will have a natural strategy. It sounds like that kind of gets built around that. Is the game tight enough that essentially that type of action is mandatory? There's no other strategy worth pursuing with it, and then it's just a question of how well you can capitalize on their particular advantage, or is it
Mm.
level enough that if you don't particularly want to focus on that aspect of it, I mean, I guess why play them maybe, but if you, I don't know, you're in a group and you get stuck with that faction, but you want to do something different, is there any chance of success, or is it, nah, do this, stick with the thing they're good at as best you can, and otherwise all hope is lost?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's going to sound like a negative to this game to say that yes, you should stick with the strategies the benefits that your faction gives you, but that doesn't detract. It doesn't ever feel railroady. There's enough latitude there where you can do, depending on the circumstances of each particular turn or round, things might change, uh, um, might diverge from that strategy. But overall, I don't think you can really win Dune if you don't play to your faction's strengths, and those strengths are outlined in the strategy tips on the shield and in the book. But it doesn't ever make it doesn't. I don't know. It doesn't feel like you're locked into anything. At least for me, it's never felt that way. To the extent that you are playing, you're playing, let's say, the Bene Gesserit, and they play, um, they're very surreptitious, right? They're very sneaky. They can, whenever you transport troops to the surface, you can send one of your Bene Gesserit with them, so you've got troops all over the place. But they can't do much in a military sense. There very rarely is a big horde of Bene Gesserit going to come over and conquer you. So trying to be a military force, especially in the early and mid game, with the Bene Gesserit, just isn't going to work. But that never, I guess that plays into the theme of the game in the sense that yes, you kind of locked into a particular type of play depending on the faction that you get. That aids the theme, and I suppose you could say that it detracts from latitude that you have when playing. But I think it's a fair trade. I think if you want to play a Dune flavored game, then you're going to have those
Yeah,
restrictions,
that's
I
what it is
suppose.
then,
Mhm.
to be that type of game. That
Yeah.
makes sense. Okay. Okay. Greg, yeah, I don't know if you have anything to add on that. Give you a chance to
Not
jump
really,
in.
other than I think all board games are about playing to your strengths, right? I mean, it's even if you
Sure.
start on a neutral level, eventually over the course of a few turns, you're going to have the thing that your lane that you picked, I guess, and now that's the strength. You're not going to be like, I have chosen the coal strategy, and then towards the end go, nope, I don't like this. I'm switching over to the wheat strategy. It doesn't make
Right. Sure.
it's just this one gives you those advantages out the gate. You already
Right.
know what you're strong at, so it does play to the theme. And I agree with Eric. I'm gonna talk about this actually in my good section a bit. But I don't feel like you're locked into anything, even though that's the case.
Let's go ahead then and move on to the good and the bad. We'll talk about the things that we liked and the things it could have done better. Let's start with what we liked about it, what it did well. And we'll start with you, Greg.
Hey, so shockingly, I'm gonna start with theme. So I know I'm always looked as the guy who doesn't care about theme, and that's because I don't like the way most modern games handle theme. But the way this game does is the way I do like it. I've already talked about how integrated it is to the Dune books and how I knew it naturally it was Dune. But the reason is because in my mind, when people say they like thematic games, the thing I always imagine in my head is them flipping over a card, and everyone sits and waits as everyone reads the story and goes, and the man walked over the hill, and he had a sword by it, and it's like they're reading this thing, and then at the end it just says, now choose one apple or lose one morale or something like that. To me that's not thematic because the gameplay mechanic at the end is just okay, do I want morale or apple? That's my choices really. All that other thing was just nonsense that makes no difference to the game itself, all that text reading. Or the theme comes through, look at these pictures. Imagine your head what this world looks like. Dune doesn't do that's not how it gets its theme across. And I agree, this is probably the most thematic game I've played as far as a board game goes. And the reason is because it's not using text or cards or images to get the theme across. It's through the gameplay itself. The factions themselves, through the rules they are given, feel like the factions in the book. It just naturally happens. And so that's what makes it so thematic to me. So the way it handles that is great. I also want to give a shout out to the way Gale Force 9 dealt with the components. Again, this is an old Ameritrash game. I think there is there has to be a huge temptation here to really mini this thing up. You know, I could totally see a different company taking this game and just making a ton of big minis and giving you all these pictures and images and stuff. But the way Gale Force 9 handled this, I thought was very subtle. There's not a lot of images. The pieces are cardboard tokens. Everything's nice in this game, but I prefer a game that keeps things rather simple and lets my own imagination fill in the blanks. So I do want to talk about the components. I thought they worked pretty well. Uh, Next, as far as good goes, the asymmetry. You can't get around this game. 6 factions, and I've never played the expansions, but there's even expansions here with more factions if you really want to add them in. But yeah, all 6 factions play very differently. I mean, and I love that because it gives you a different feel every time. You can play this game 6 times, play a different faction each time, and you're going to have a different game than everybody else. And there's also something about being the master of something that just feels good in a game, I think. It's like, I am Atreides, so I know what treachery cards are out there. That's my faction. I have some prophetic stuff I can do. all that's my world. If you want to deal with treachery cards, come through me, or whatever the case may be. So that is pretty cool. Um, I also want to talk about, okay, so you mentioned the whole thing with the chaos. You'll notice it's in the good section, because I want to talk about that here. I am typically against randomness in a game, or I'm not against it. I just don't particularly care for that in games. But the way this game handles it is beautiful. I think it's so elegant the way it handles uh, hidden information and randomness. Yes, things are random. Where's the sandworm going to pop up? How far is the storm going to move? Who's got my treachery card? Who's got the defense or whatever? All that is random in this game, but the beautiful thing about this game is somebody knows that piece of information. So it's not completely obscured. So the way to get the information is you got to start negotiating. You got to start trading. And that's, again, what gives the Dune theme such a strong thing. Because at the end of the day, Dune is really a big political book. It's all about the politics and the treachery. And that really seals that idea, is because, man, is that storm going to go 2 spaces or 6? Because that's going to completely change my player. And the Fremen player goes, well, pay me some money, I'll tell you. It's all available to you. So if you really want to know something, you can get it. The kind of randomness I typically don't like is like where you walk into the thing, roll dice to see if you succeed. That doesn't interest me just because it's just, you're just playing with probabilities at that point. It's not interesting. But this one, the information's out there most likely. You just have to pay for it. So I do like that. And yeah, it just fits the theme perfectly. The chaos bit of the game, it does feel chaotic to me, but I love that in this game. It just fits the game so well in that it doesn't do anything half-heartedly. Again, there's nuclear explosions in this game. Like, what was it, a las gun versus a shield or something like that? Like, it'll just blow up everything on that spot. The storm wipes out everybody. The worms destroy everything. Losing a battle loses all your troops. Treachery wipes out everything. There's so much things shifting in and out that it just feels constantly in motion. I love that about this game. It just feels active. This isn't not to beat up on a game, but I was playing Blood Rage not too long ago, and it, people always talk about how like action oriented it was, and to me it just felt so static. I don't know how to describe it. It just felt, compared to this game, it just feels so static to me. Where, but the thing about this game, because it's so chaotic, it just feels you're never safe. You can never just rest. You have to be moving and thinking and always active. And I like that. A game that kind of engages you from the beginning to the end because of the chaos involved in it. Finally, you talked about, does it feel like it locks you into things? And again, I don't think that's true. I think this game actually allows for some clever play. I've already kind of talked about that shield wall, and I always stick with that because there's a lot of cool, like one of the games we played recently, and I can't remember the exact details, but I remember thinking, okay, I need one more stronghold. These people are here. The Fremen can survive a storm with a half a hit. I'm going last in turn order. Let me see if I can blow up this shield wall and then get in there, lose my half my troops, and then I would win the game. But it's like that kind of clever play. I feel like it's clever. It might not be clever. Maybe it's like a normal strategy, but for me, it just felt clever to like kind of work through that process to do it. There's enough levers in this game to pull that even if you lose all your troops in a single spot and you get treacheryed and you just feel, oh, I lost everything, you always feel like there's a path back. It never feels like you're locked down. There's enough things to pull and manipulate that you feel like there's things that you can do. And that makes you feel like you can do some things that are interesting all the time. So that's the good.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that if I guess if it would make sense that if it's chaotic enough, that would counteract a feeling of like a spiral of death, right? That like you're now it's so deterministic that you can't it's determined you can't win, which would be good. So that's interesting. Okay, let's go over to Eric. Eric, what did you like about Dune?
I I like pretty much everything about Dune. The game is engaging on your turn. It's engaging on other people's turns. Greg mentioned hey, pay me some money and I'll give you this information. When it's not your turn, you're still there. You still have things to add to the game. You're never, not that I don't like games that allow for you to kind of, you know, go get a beer or something when it's not your turn. But this game has you at the table all the time, even when it's somebody else's turn. And also the different levers were mentioned that you can pull, different ways to implement your particular strategy. Because the game is so dynamic and changing all the time, the way that that actually is implemented on your turn is can be vastly different. One good example is, you play as the Bene Gesserit. Bene Gesserit are the only faction that has two sides to their tokens, right? One side is you're there, you have a token down on the map, but it doesn't count as far as like combat is concerned.
Your advisors, they call it, I think.
The advisors, spiritual advisors, yes. But at a particular point in your turn, you can flip that over and become an aggressor. Well, because of the rule that says you can only have two aggressive factions in one map area at a time, you can lock somebody out. If you know that somebody's about to come in and attack and win this stronghold, you can flip your advisor over, and now you have a combat there, and nobody else can come in to invade. Little things like that give you so many different possibilities and options that even if you play the same faction over and over and over again, it's always going to feel like a different game. And not to harp on that, not harping, but not to go back to the shield wall thing. But the shield wall is a real fun part of the game, like Greg said. And there's been multiple games that I've played where the shield wall gets blown up, and everybody's like, "Oh my God! Like what just happened? Like we're all gonna die now." And that sense of energy that comes from something changing on the board is well, it's really exciting. And finally, Greg mentioned the components. I've always loved the way this game looks in pretty much all of its productions. This version, the Gale Force 9 version, didn't do the minis thing, and I was kind of worried about that when they were going to re-release it. I was like, I don't want a huge box full of minis. It looks I don't know if I should. It doesn't look like a what do they call it, Greg? A chit and counter war game, where you got little stacks of cardboard all over the place. But
Chit and Hex war game.
Chit and Hex, thank you. Yeah, but it kind of reminds me of that kind of aesthetic where you're dealing with a lot of little cardboard components that are high quality. The pictures look great, but it doesn't get so cluttered, and it's not overproduced, basically. Yeah, and I think the art, especially the board, I just love the board. Like, let me show it to everybody real fast. It's a circular. It's small, it's tiny, but it looks like Dune. Yes, there's a lot of brown. I made fun of Dune Imperium for being brown, but what are you going to do? It's Dune.
I mean, it's a desert planet.
It's a desert planet, right?
What you gonna do?
What do but yeah, I think that it's pretty as well. So this one fires on all cylinders for me.
Awesome. Okay. Well, let's so then let me put you on the spot now and turn around and ask you what you don't like about it then.
Yeah, so there are some like more meta things. I already mentioned one of them. I do think the game can suffer from turtley players. So players who don't, even if you have just one or two players who aren't willing to sell their information, that usually backfires on the player, and it backfires on the game in general, where you have to have a group of players who are comfortable playing the negotiation aspect of this and not just playing an area control game. That's probably the biggest one. Probably next to it is the density. The density of the rules is there can be things, especially with the Fremen. The Fremen have like the weirdest win condition where they win if these things happen, but if somebody else doesn't have this this stronghold, or not even a strong. If one other faction doesn't control this stronghold and the Fremen control these strongholds, they win. There's a lot of fiddliness to it, which I've never had a problem introducing new people to this game, but it could potentially serve as like a barrier to enjoyment, I suppose. Um, there are some weird things. I mentioned how beautiful the map was, but there are some weird um, elements to the map where there's there's a couple of strongholds that have like a little dotted line around them. There may be some issues with clarity on the map and various components like that. But once you've played a couple times and you know what you're looking for, it shouldn't be a problem. Um, I would say also that if you're going to play the game, um, you should play with all of the advanced rules. I'm resistant to that because there's one particular advanced rule where the you have to pay spice to get your soldiers up to full strength, and that can lead to situations where you have like a half strength soldier, and you have to use the little battle wheel and put it on like the middle between two numbers. Um, that can be pretty obtuse, and but when you get your head around that and when you start playing with the advanced rules, the game balance is extraordinary. So you need that. You need all the advanced rules to play a really fair game. But other than that, other than just kind of like getting your head around the game and playing it as it was intended, which is not really a bad on the game's fault. It's just, I guess, a matter of buy-in from the players. I don't. There's not really much bad with this game.
Okay, so I have a question that leads me to a question, but I think, well, Greg, I'll give you a chance to do the bad. You may talk about it. I don't want to step on any of your points, so but remind me because I have a question then to come back to if Greg doesn't touch on it. So, but Greg, let's go to you for what you think the game could have done better.
Sure. And we'll just point out one thing Eric said. The reason why if you don't do that half measure thing and you don't take that rule, you're actually debuffing the Fremen because they won't get their thing. But that's why it is. But I agree that is a little bit annoying having to keep track of half point stuff. Um, but as far as other things go, hold on. Where did my outline go? Here it is. Chaos. Okay, I talked about that in a good, and I do like the way it handles the chaos. But if you're the type of player that gets frustrated by things that are out of your control sometimes, and it's just losing you the game through no fault of your own, that to me that's just par for the course in this game. There's all sorts of things that can happen that just completely obliterate you. You just got unfortunate, and that's it. You're out. It doesn't bother me that much just because of the nature. If you go into the game with that in your head, you're there for the experience more than the win. I think you're fine. But just note that that can be annoying. Other than that, it does go a little long. I'm surprised that thing says 2 to 3 hours. That seems shocking to me. I don't know how this game go 2 to 3 hours. It can go a little long. It's not a game you can just squeeze into a short night. So you got to have some space reserved for it. And I do think the player count is a little restrictive. I really think at best this is a 6 player game. That's what you want. You can play with 5 and it plays okay, but it really starts to get less and less enjoyable with less players. You want the full 6 if possible.
Yeah,
So
so you're starting to touch on the thing I was going to ask about. Yeah,
yeah,
go
you
ahead.
kind of gotta have you kind of in my mind it's a 6 player game. Uh,
Mhm.
we've done it with 5 before and it plays fine, but typically you're going to leave the Benny Gesserit out if that's what your question is. You can leave the Benny Gesserit out because they're kind of playing their own way. They have the least impact on cutting them out. Like you can still play with 5.
Yeah, that's kind of my question is like if it breaks the game to have players who don't participate because you need those functions to exist in the game,
Oh,
well,
it
what if you
can.
just don't have the players there?
Yeah, I mean it's a weird thing too because it's like if a player's not involved, they're playing suboptimally. So
Right.
they're shooting themselves in the foot, but they're also kind of affecting the feel of the game because you want players that are going to be involved. I mean that's kind of a player issue, honestly, because if you're playing the way to win, like you should be playing, you're going to be involved. So you should. But yeah, I always, as Eric was going through his bad, I'm like, you know what? I didn't talk enough about the Bene Gesserit. I wanted to bring more up in the good because the Bene Gesserit is such a cool faction. I love the Bene Gesserit. They're amazing. I want to talk more about their powers they can do, but yeah, I mean the Bene Gesserit because they're kind of like they're not fighters, so they kind of like are an overlay. They're kind of like a little back sub game in a way, because they come down as advisors, but they can also like tell people what they need to play on their turn. You play this type of treachery card. But the coolest thing about the Bene Gesserit, I don't know how often people win this way, is you at the beginning of the game you choose like a round and a faction that's going to win on that round, and if you're right, you win the game. So you can kind of like play this whole mind game where you're trying to manipulate this one faction to win in a specific round. But anyways, but yeah, you can remove the Bene Gesserit, I think, and play 5 okay. But I feel like without the Bene Gesserit, you're missing a lot. So in my but ultimately that's the bad. I think it's really a 6-player game, so that does kind of limit you as to when you can pull this out and play. Beyond that, one little thing with the components, man, this I tell you, when you do a combat in this game, especially you're playing with the spice rule and all that. I mean, you got like cards and a leader and a little chit you got under here, and you're holding spice, and you're trying to hold all these secretly as you do this and flip it all over at the same time. I do find that to be a little annoying. Sometimes you got so many things you're trying to hide underneath this little wheel. It just, it just feels like, am I playing this wrong? Is this just no way they expect you to be doing this, but they do. I don't know how to get around that, but and again, that's a super minor thing. It doesn't bother me, but that's it. That's all I got for the bad, actually.
I had a question for you, Greg. You remind me what your thoughts were on scythe combat. You didn't like it,
I
right?
did not like side combat.
So what's the difference? Like, because
I
this
did
is
not like side
Scythe pulled
combat.
it directly from Dune,
It
basically.
did because it's super simplified for one, so it doesn't have all the interesting things that can happen like in Dune combat. Dune combat, all sorts of crazy stuff can happen because of the treachery cards. It doesn't have that. You're just dialing up and bidding on something and you lose that amount. But other thing about Scythe is to me, it didn't feel like real combat because you just get beamed back to your
I was
home
gonna say, yeah,
tile,
yeah.
whereas the consequences in this one are a lot higher.
Mhm.
But I think it's just Scythe is a very, very simplified. It's too streamlined, I guess.
Too
It's
simple, right?
too
No, that
simplified.
yeah, you're not wrong. The combat in Scythe does not it only affects you in the sense that like you are now one hex further away from the board.
Yeah,
Like you
exactly.
don't lose
Yeah,
anything. Whereas in this, it takes quite a bit of time to get those troops back, and there's
it
many,
does.
many more of them.
Yeah, the consequences are higher, and what can happen is just so much more interesting in a combat in this game. So,
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and get into our final thoughts. So we'll get your guys' uh, final things you want to say. Anything you haven't said yet about this game that you would like to get in now, as well as what you rate it. And uh, I'm kind of interested to see, since you both like it quite a bit, if you feel like there is room for it on either the 10 or the 25 game shelf. Let's go to you first, Eric.
Well, despite some of the minor negatives that I said before, I give this game a 10. It is, I
Wow.
correct me if I'm wrong, but it was on my top 10
I
games of
think
all
it was.
time.
Yeah.
The game is engaging. The game is other people's turns are interesting. It gives you plenty of choices. I don't want to say unlimited, but it gives you so many choices that you're never going to exhaust them. There's plenty of moments in the game that are just riveting, exciting, and I think it's while it doesn't have the miniatures component and maybe I could see an argument for people saying that it's not pretty, but I disagree. I think that it is a very well designed. The components are perfect for what it's doing. It doesn't. Sometimes heavy miniatures games they actually distract me from the game itself, whereas this is it looks great on the table. It actually doesn't take up the box is fairly small. It doesn't take up as much space as some of those big sprawling miniatures games. I think it does great there. So yeah, 10 for me. This is one of my favorite games of all time. Oh, and uh, also on my list was Diplomacy because I
Mhm.
love that kind of backstabby interaction style of game, and this if you're a fan of diplomacy, um, this is right up your alley.
Okay, great. So we'll get to the shelf discussion in a minute. Let's go to Greg. Your final thoughts and your rating, Greg.
So maybe to the shock of all, I give this a 9.
Wow.
It is a 9, which is really high for me. Um, I know this would seem like a game that's not typically in my wheelhouse, but I will say, if you were to design an Ameritrash game for Greg, this is the way you design it. This is the way, because the way it gets the theme across, the way it does the chaos, the way it does the Ameritrash games are all about being very drama focused, moments of drama. The way this game gets that across is exactly what I want. It's not doing it through over bloated components and doing things with a feel the story and this is let me read what's going to happen, be excited. Like it's happening through the gameplay. And there's enough depth here. There's enough strategic depth here that I'm always constantly thinking about ways to win, new things. There's plenty for my brain to play with, even if at the end it's all for naught and I get wiped out anyways because of some crazy thing that happens. It's still fun. I feel like I'm engaging with the game on a strategic level. So yeah, I think this is a great game. Yeah, so I give it a 9.
I do want to say one thing that should have been said in the good that we didn't talk about, but I'll bring it up here in the final thought. My final thoughts. Um, I love the economy of this game.
Oh,
How
yeah.
how money moves around the board is like when you start the game, you feel like if you're the emperor, you feel like you could never be poor, right? Like all the money is coming to you. Every time somebody buys a treachery card, that money goes to you. But then you've got to pay that money to someone else if you're shipping people down to the surface of Arrakis, or you've got to pay it uh, to the Atreides if you want to know what the treachery cards are. That's how the money flows. It's very natural feeling. It feels like the game again. I know I should have said that earlier, but it's not like you just have a number of hexes and that's how much money you generate every turn. You've got to go get that money, get that spice, and um, the way it moves around to the different players is excellent.
Okay, nice. So I think I mean, I guess we'd have to look back and see, but it sounds then like it's our most highly rated game apart from Go. Um,
Probably. Yeah, probably.
so so let's talk about the shelf. 10 and 25 game shelf. What do you guys want to do?
I'm willing to put something on the 10 game shelf with this game. I
Oh
think
yeah, me too.
this definitely would go. If an Eric 10 and my 9 doesn't go on here, what's the point of the shelf? So
Right.
there's a few games I would be willing to let go, Eric. I'd be curious to hear which one you'd want to let go. There's a few I would fight against, but there's a few I'd be willing.
Given that and I guess this is the reason I mentioned the economy. Um, what do you feel about Power Grid? I know Power Grid is a staple for you,
I do
and
like Power Grid just because the player count on it is good and it's my feeling on this 10 game shelf has changed of late. I used to want to try to keep games on here that I could play with non-gamers, but I think the last few videos I've been kind of like, you know what, for the 10 game
Forget
shelf,
non-gamers.
forget non-gamers. There's not that many games on here. So now that I'm looking at this list, I'm looking at things like code names and the crew and like, do they really belong on this list? Um, 25 game shelf, sure, but I like Power Grid still enough. Just because the Power Grid's hard for me just because it plays 3 to 6 players and I always want something around.
and
Whereas
that
Dune
is a
is,
yeah. You have to. I agree with you. You need 5 or 6 players. I don't think I've ever played without 6 players.
yeah,
Um,
it's
what about the estates? Again, economic. The
I
estates is
do
kind of a
like the
light
estates
filler.
a lot, but I like Dune more.
Hmm.
So I'd be willing to drop the estates.
I agree with you. Like, I mean, I'm trying to keep in mind the point of the 10 game shelf. It is supposed to be played with like, can I pull something out for everybody? And
Yeah,
the crew is fantastic. It's on our 10. Um, and I like the crew because it's the kind of game that I like to play at the end of a big game.
exactly. I want to keep some games on here that are lighter and quicker. The estates is on here because it's like a 45-minute game,
Right,
which
right.
is nice, but I'm okay getting rid of
Honestly,
it.
When I'm looking at this, just from my gut, although we don't really have a lot of party games anymore, but code names could go.
I just don't, honestly, for my own personal shelf, I don't need a party game.
I don't feel like you'd ever. I don't feel like you'd ever have code names.
No, I don't. I don't need a party game. I don't. I think in the beginning I'm thinking, oh, but what if my friends come over that don't play games? What am I gonna play with them? But now I'm like, I don't know. It's only 10
Yeah.
games. I don't got room for them.
Yeah, you've gotten rid of all of your friends at this point, haven't you?
Exactly.
And the crew can play as a party game, kind of.
It can, yeah. Although less players.
Mhm.
But I'm okay with any of those. The estates, code names, the crew. I could even be fought with Tigris and Euphrates if you really
See,
wanted to.
really,
But I do like
I
Tigris
that
a
one
lot,
so
and it's
much.
a shorter game.
Yeah.
But I'd be okay with any of those four. I'll let you pick.
Okay, I pick code names.
Okay, that's fine.
All right, code names. Goodbye. So I think then we still have to talk about the 25 game shelf because obviously it's going to go on the 10. It's going to go on the
Yeah.
25. But you're going to
There's a bajillion games on here I'd be willing to get rid of.
yeah. So that should be
25
easier
game shelf.
pickings, right?
just now the 25 game shelf. I do want to keep games I can play with non-gamers. You know what? It'd just be
It'd be fitting to get rid of Dune Imperium.
fitting
right?
to get rid of Dune Imperium.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, how many Dune themed games does
I
one
did
person
not
need?
like Dune Imperium that much. I didn't care for it. I
Yeah,
don't need.
let's get rid
Yeah.
of that. I mean,
Okay, let's just
yeah.
knock out Dune Imperium with the real Dune.
the real Dune, the only Dune.
Nice.
There is a new Dune. There's several new Dune games out, of course, since the
Yes.
movie came out.
They're going crazy with the IP now. The movie came out.
Yeah, they are.
And you know,
Nice.
back in the day, like I don't know, like 5 years ago, this question came up where someone said, "What IP would you like to see more board games in?" And I said, "Dune," because back then there were like no Dune games aside from that original one, this they were playing. But now there's Dune games all over the place. But I don't think any of them, in my
And
opinion,
you're
have.
still not satisfied.
I don't think any of them have come anywhere near close to.
No,
this,
not
this
remotely.
one,
But
as far as
I
capturing the
mean,
theme
it's
goes.
hard to fight the power of Timothy Chalamet.
That's true. True.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so goodbye code names and goodbye Dune Imperium. What are we going to review next time? Next year, I guess.
Next year.
Who knows? You know, I would like to say we could do PAX Premiere.
Me too. Yeah.
I do own the game now.
Okay, good.
By the way, everyone, Eric has moved away
Yes,
since, so we don't get to play
Yes.
games face to face anymore. So
Yeah.
that's true.
And
been a lot more
obviously it's been a while. They needed time off to grow their beards.
that's
That's
true.
right.
So
Yeah.
I didn't want to be
You know.
shown in public with stubble.
mhm.
What's your excuse, Micah?
No, this is me. This is me after a year. This is how far I've gotten.
You can't see it on the camera, but there's one long hair right here.
Right. Right. So yeah. Yeah, so I think we're gonna hopefully they'll get back on a regular, as much as
Well,
we've ever been regular,
As much as we
we'll be back,
can. I mean, it's been difficult.
hopefully to a regular schedule, and so we think in PAX Premiere next time. Hopefully.
Let's try and find a way to play that. I'm sure there's some way we can make that happen.
Yeah, and plus I'm trying to get my local group together to play it too. But I know you have it, I have it, so that's one.
I've played
that's
it many
definitely-
times, so if you actually get a chance to put it on the table a couple times, we could review it, even though we
Yeah,
haven't
so
played it
I
together.
just gotta get it played in my end, I think, a few times. To the point where I feel like I can review that game, which I think might take more plays than normal. that's an interesting game, but we'll see. Yeah, but we'll try to do more as much as we can.
Okay, cool. So if you have not checked out Dune, sounds like we really couldn't be recommending it more highly. So give it a try. Stay tuned for PAX Premiere coming shortly, and until then, this has been a piece of the action.
Oh, I actually don't remember that.
Yeah,
I remember that episode.
I have a gut feeling.
Is
I
that the
had a
episode
guess when you read the question. I feel like I want to say B, the founder. It had something to do with wasn't there some point where he merged with some of the founders or something?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know that. Yeah.
Well, there's one
That's
he
my
went into the link and he
Mm-hmm.
but I don't.
That happened at the end, of course.
There was that one time the doctor did visit him, the one, and he no, that was different. Because there's that one time that changeling came and showed him how to do all the different shapes, and he was like a mist on the promenade and stuff like that. I don't know.
Yeah,
actually,
that's right. Yeah, it's challenging. I feel like it's either B or D. Either the founders
Yeah.
returned them, or he absorbed a dying changeling.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I'm gonna go with D just because that feels more like DS9. It's very.
And this is early-ish DS9, I think.
Maybe.
it tends to go sequentially in with the questions.
Oh, I
Okay.
see.
Using meta knowledge.
So what are you gonna say, Micah?
Well, Greg will go D. My first instinct was
I have
B,
no
so
idea.
I'll stick with B, although probably
Okay.
I'm wrong. But
All right, I'm thinking it's D. That's right. He absorbed a dying changeling in the Begotten.
Yeah.
So I know that the founders did cut him off, right, at some point.
He killed a changeling at one
That's
point.
right.
And that was the first time that happened in like centuries or something.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was like a big sin in their culture. I mean, that's a sin in every culture, I suppose, killing people, but particularly so in
speak for
theirs.
yourself.
I don't know. The Klingons seem to like it.
That's
Yeah.
true.
Okay.